we're just going to get started. My name is Joanna Young, and I'm the Management Director of Strategy from Team One, which is a part of Publicis Group. We're an advertising agency. And we're going to be talking about resonating with the youth market with some experts on the subject. I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves. Ben, do you mind starting?
I don't. I'm Ben Dietz. I'm SVP at Vice Media, sitting out of New York, but with sort of purview and relationships all over the world.
Hi everyone, Diane Gatwa. I'm with the National Basketball Association, the NBA. I'm Vice President of Global Business Operations, and I also manage our relationship with USA Basketball.
Hi, I'm Gabriel Salzman. I'm former Chief Commercial Officer for Mattel International, and I oversaw all of the business outside of the US.
Welcome, guys, and thank you. It's fun to share the stage with you. Okay, so I think the way that we're going to do this, I'm told we have about 50 minutes, and so we definitely wanted to make sure that there was some time for audience questions. So just really quickly, logistically, we don't have a mic, so what I'm just going to do is probably stop at about the 35 or 40 minute mark, open the floor to questions, and if you have any, then I just ask you to stand. We're a pretty intimate forum, it looks like anyway, and ask out loud. Does that work for everybody? Great. Okay, so just diving right in, I think just as we're talking about the youth market, and you guys really are have very different purviews about it, I was wondering if you could just kind of go down the line and just talk about how you define youth market from where you sit, and really what the importance of that is, global standpoint as well as just from an organizational standpoint.
Sure. So from Vice's standpoint, we think of ourselves as a youth media brand, but we have a sort of an interesting pedigree in that regard. We've been around for 25 years, and so we have an audience that has grown up with us that sort of sits within the younger cohort of Gen X, and which now interacts with us largely through our television properties. We have a millennial audience which was young when they found the brand and has themselves grown a little older, got into life stage changes, that represents a kind of a core and a mindset that I think informs a lot of what we do. And then Gen Z is our actual youth, to the 12 to 24s who interact with the content that we publish on Snapchat almost exclusively. So we tend not to think of things in terms of an age. We tend to think of them in terms of a mindset, a life stage, or a location around the world.
Cool, that's really good to know.
From the NBA's perspective, we actually define youth as people ages 6 to 17, and then within that, so like if you look around the world, I think 1.5 billion within that market. And then within the 6 to 17 range, we actually break it down into two groups. So it's 6 to 12 and then 13 to 17, because there's actually a change in behavior when we look at those two groups. The 6 to 12-year-olds tend to be influenced by their parents, their family, and then the teenagers, 13 to 17, tend to be influenced more by their peers and social media. And so that's how we approach the market.
So then is that how you're making platform selections as well, to reach the different audiences?
Correct, because if you look across, we can look at social media platforms, right? Snapchat skews much younger compared to Instagram and Facebook. So like if we look at our percentage of followers on those defined as youth, and this is just 13 to 17 because you have to be that age in order to sign up for accounts. We definitely see a huge difference across those platforms. YouTube also, we look at obviously our viewers on that platform. I think 8% of our viewers are within that age group.
Okay, cool. Gabrielle?
In the case of toys, and having brands like Fisher-Price, Barbie, Hot Wheels, we do a lot of age segmentation, and it's not only talking about the baby or the toddler, but it's also about the family. So at the moment that a family knows that a baby's coming, that's when Fisher-Price start talking with that family, and that has a certain strategy to go after. But kids change every 2, 4, 6 months, so we do have a age segmentation and mostly monthly segmentation on how we deal with our brands and the users. And so who you're talking to sometimes is parents, sometimes it's specifically the kids. It's very targeted.
So then bringing in the international element, I mean, Gabrielle, I think you had mentioned it before as well, and you had this beautiful quote that you had said about children are the same, but families are different depending on the region or something to that.
Yeah,
Could you talk a
I
little
talked
bit more
a little bit
about
about that this morning, is that the reaction of a kid in the plains of Mongolia or in Paris or in Lima, Peru is very similar when they have a toy in front. They press a button, a light comes up, sound starts playing. They just have a smile. So, and that's across the globe. When you start to understand is what are the parents thinking about the value of that toy, what they want to bring into their houses or not. So the cultural element comes after, and it's, well, the purchaser in that case is the one that is being the gatekeeper for those toys. But the kids, they react very similar. And I think that's why the toy category was one of the first that, started mass production and global production, because the product itself relates very well from one place to the other.
So Diane, kind of on a similar level, from an international context, are you approaching different markets in different kinds of ways, or do you have a kind of consistent?
Yeah, well,
way?
one program that we've had, one global initiative is our junior MBA program, and what that is. So actually, when we think about the youth market, we try to make sure that we approach it two ways. So we're focused on one, participation, and then two, engagement. When I say participation, all that means is getting them to play the sport of basketball, so on court. And then when I say engagement, it's making sure that we we engage with them and touch them in other ways, whether it be through their, a math problem that involves basketball, or content, maybe non-game content on a social media platform, or other ways, but more off-court. And so our junior NBA program is one that is focused on participation, and that really is getting kids to play the sport. In all the markets, well, it's not quite all yet, but one of our strategies is working together with ministries of education in various countries. We first approached the Ministry of Education in China. In China, we're now in 500 schools, so it's actually basketball, the junior NBA curriculum is embedded into the curriculum of 500 schools in China. And so if you think about our reach through the Ministry of Education, it's massive. And so we're trying to do that and replicate that strategy in other countries as well. There's a bunch of countries in Asia outside of China that we've started those partnerships, and then we're looking to do that in Africa and other places in the world as well.
So then actually bringing in the elements of parents now as an overlay, I'm kind of curious, I mean, Ben, you had mentioned that your parents are actually your audience as much as youth.
That's not really my parents. They're proud of me, but they don't watch all that much.
Fair enough. So not the Dietz family, but potentially others.
Yes.
Potentially a little younger maybe than your parents.
Yes. So sorry, I cut you off. Sorry, jokes.
So,
Finish the question,
so
please.
all jokes aside, I mean, just really kind of curious about how you're bringing in and thinking and being mindful of this kind of multi-generational reach and relevance that you need to have. And just anecdotally, I was chatting with a friend of mine who, on a very separate note, works for wine companies. They do distribution. And she was saying that actually the way it's working now, back in the day, it's that whole like not your father's Oldsmobile kind of thing. You don't actually want to drink the wines that your parents drink and whatnot. And now they're noticing that there's a lot of families that are coming in, and parents are actually the ones that are purchasing wine subscriptions for their of-age children. So it almost ends up becoming a point of connectivity, which is also what's happening with music, I think. You listen to the same things, there's a lot more of that kind of exchange rather than saying this is fuddy-duddy music, so therefore I won't do it. So anyway, I was just kind of curious, I mean, how you approach that, and are you actually very deliberate about trying to create points of connectivity or not? And it's the same question for both of you as well.
Okay, so Vice started with the idea that in order to be authentic to an audience, you have to speak to the audience in the voice they speak to each other in, right? And you have to put content in front of them everywhere they want to consume it. That was true when we were a magazine, and it's accidentally a very scalable proposition in both cases, right? Because as long as you know how to speak to an audience in the voice they speak to each other in, you can talk to any audience, right? From 0 to 80. we tend to think of it more in terms of how do people talk to each other around the things that are most motivating and interesting to them. Those tend to be passion points more so than life stage, or theoretically in the past it was always about passion points more so than life stages. The fact that those passion points are now more transferable, to your point, my son and I listen to a lot of the same music because we get it through the same sources. He's 12, I'm not. And yet, like, we're much closer together than my father and I were, for instance, or my mother and I were. We try to find those kind of passion points and build on those. What has been surprising to us is that our audiences, they've grown with Vice and they've been introduced to us via the news stories of going to North Korea with Dennis Rodman, or our music coverage, or whatever the case may be, that they come to ask us to help them to create end-to-end information relationship for them. So if they are millennials and they are starting families, they then want to know about parenting. And they want to know about it, how we understand it and how we think of it. So it's more a matter of just kind of going, all right, how would we approach parenting? Is there enough of a traction there for us to talk about this? And then how do we do so from a differentiated point of view than parenting.com, which is not very difficult, right? Because that's a much more utility-based and much more sort of legacy point of view than ours, which tends to be questions like, is it cool if I bring my baby to brunch?
Yes.
With, or am I going to get shamed for being hungover if I bring my baby to brunch? That sort of thing.
Just 2 Bloody Marys, no more.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, babies are awesome. They go everywhere, right?
So they are portable.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if building a little bit on the way we communicate with parents, we do understand much more those cultural differences, and in some cases the play category it's not related to early stages of development. So in a case like China, that's something that we have worked through several strategies around. How do you make play valuable for those families, and getting that message right, and linking play to development has been crucial for the successes that we have had with a brand like Fisher-Price, and it's really understanding what that Chinese family was looking for, and then showing that our brands and our products would deliver on that need, that it was actually covering that need, and at the same time, brands like Hot Wheels also get linked back to certain aspects of what a kid's development is, and a brand like Barbie is about empowering girls. So there's messages that resonate with the girl, the boy, or the user of the product, but also with the parents of those boys and girls.
How are you kind of maintaining relevance outside and making sure that you're getting it right outside of sales? I'm just curious, like what are your personal kind of success?
This is one of the most fickle targets out there. They change every 18 to 24 months. It is. I mean, you get, what I normally joke about is 1 year of a toy brand is like a dog's year in a consumer goods brand. 7 years of a consumer goods brand. Because your consumer goes in and then goes out very, very quickly. So brands that have lasted decades are very rare in the toy industry. And you have a cemetery of brands that just had a peak and then died. So you got to change with times. You got to stay true to your vision, your life, or what does that DNA mean? I mean, when I talk about Barbie and about empowering girls, everybody on that team is thinking that way, and that is how that brand was created. So the essence of the brand still resonates. The way you tell the storyline around it changes, and that's how you make it relevant.
Interesting. Diane, could you talk a little bit, I don't want to turn this into appealing to Chinese families, but I'm just curious in terms of that, the relevance and what you had spoken earlier about in terms of programming. Is the concept of play important to what you're finding with the kind of curriculum you're doing? It's very different, I think, just from, I guess, what I just anecdotally know, where it's much more about studying, not about physical activity. But it feels like just from a global standpoint, again, just more as a parent than anything else, that concept of play and imagination and grit and resilience being the other side of it seem to be very kind of vogue today. Is that true, or is it just kind of my personal bias?
No, and it's true. It's actually quite relevant because we've actually done a survey across 8 markets, and we discovered that when I was talking about participation earlier, and interest or fandom, it actually happens around the age of 8 or 9 within that time frame, and sometimes fandom comes first, sometimes participation comes first. And so, and within that age, right, what I spoke about, it's usually the parents who then influence the kids. And so it would be the parents who would then sort of pay and put a kid to one of our basketball schools. We have, it's a tuition program, so it's outside of the junior MBA program we have within schools. But so for those kids who want to play more basketball, then they go to an MBA basketball school. But we then have to market to parents, right? And then, so how do we market to parents? We say, but this is something that we believe in, and it's really authentic, and I think that's why it resonates, is that I think playing the sport of basketball teaches your kid teamwork, it teaches discipline, it teaches creativity. Apart from all the other benefits of physical activity, and we think that then helps the kid, and especially in a lot of Asian countries, China in particular, where basketball is extremely popular, where there's also a huge focus on education and achievement in education. We kind of need to then make sure that those values and those benefits come out in the message that we share to the kids and the parents.
Then shifting over actually to youth as consumers, curious, are they different or are they just young? We talk about, platform choices. I think that they do have slightly different expectations. My daughter still doesn't understand what a commercial is, which is kind of fascinating, Just skip over that, you can't this time, but how do you explain that to a 3-year-old? But I'm just curious, from your perspective, are kids today different, and how, if so?
Oh, the access to content is incredible. So they don't have to fight anyone for a remote control. They just go into the iPad, touch whatever they want, and they get it. So the amount of content and the access to that content has completely changed the ball game on how you talk to them, how you engage them, and what stories can you bring to them. And not only the stories, but also the formats. If you talk about unpacking a toy, which is, all of you know about this, is just kids filming how they open a box, and you get millions of views. So I do think that storylines, access, the way of distribution of content, and the formats that you can create that content. Just putting a camera on top of a Hot Wheels creates something that is incredibly appealing visually, and as a storyline, that Hot Wheels just turning around an orange track for a mile or so. That just is incredible content. It's so easy to distribute, so easy to produce. So the barriers of producing that content have come down. The ways of distributing that content has come down. And a lot of more people can do it. So I do think they own the narrative much more.
So then how do you break through with the proliferation of content, to your point? How do you break through against?
You have to be as smart as Vice.
Wow, I like that. Keep you around to introduce me. Look, I think where you ultimately win with any audience is in giving them cultural capital through their interaction with whatever your product is, right? In our case, it's entertainment, and the anecdote I often use is I say the point of a great Vice story, and should be the point of any Vice story, is that the person who watches it, reads it, interacts with it, leaves that moment, goes and finds his or her friends and wins the conversation because they have a piece of information that is uniquely told, uniquely wrought, uniquely sourced, and differentiates them from something else. That's their cultural capital going forward. And I think we move increasingly into a space where if all information is available to everybody, the sources that are able to filter and to find the unique point of view or the unique storytelling value are the ones that win. My son, my daughter are going to be much more discerning about those things than I was, and I was much more discerning than my parents were.
Anything to add, Diane, on that?
Yeah, well, no, I was just thinking about that. I have a 6-year-old boy, and the iPad thing, he actually would wake up. He makes sure, well, we learned, but he makes sure he wakes up much earlier than we would, just so he could.
Is that him making sure,
well,
or that's you guys sleeping in?
And he would.
Because I know what my
watch,
answer to that
yeah,
would
so,
be.
and then he would watch it underneath his blanket, and we figured it out. So then my husband put in a password. And so now he doesn't do that. But then now he figured out the TV. But even when he goes to the TV, he watches content from YouTube, which amazes me. He is obsessed about, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but a brother, a sister, she's older, and the brother, and they just and I'm like, first of all, how does he come across that content, right? Discovery, and that he listens to every word that they say. And so, I'm just thinking for companies like Mattel and all these, other companies that are competing for those dollars, how do you work with those influencers? And because they just have so much power over these young minds.
If you look at the history of it, when Ruth Handler started the company, she was called by Walt Disney, and Walt Disney said, "Hey, I'm planning to start Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Saturday mornings." And she asked, "Well, how much are you going to charge me?" And he said, $250,000. She said, "That's 6 months of sales. I cannot do that." Somehow they sorted out the money, and she advertised on Mickey Mouse Clubhouse for Barbie, and that was a change of the scale of the business. And so we really became so productive at using the TV medium and producing TV spots, and that became one of the elements that was unique about the toy industry. You would put a TV spot, POS would go up. Now, fragmentation has happened. You don't have to. You don't have just one Disney. You have to talk with so many people. You have to talk with YouTube. You have to talk with Nick. You have to talk with so many partners to get your content viewed, and then you're still catching lightning in the bottle. So, like I said, this, especially when you go below 5-6 years old, it's a very fickle target, and they have the possibilities to change from one thing to the other, inclusive in content. So you have to tell good stories, you have to be true to your nature, and you have to test new types of formats and storylines. This whole thing about the camera on top of Hot Wheels, completely different format, and then you start using UGC, and then you have more of a movement. But it's not an easy formula, especially when you have something that you have learned over time to just make the switch.
No, I'm fascinated by that, but no.
Actually, just kind of going to the other side of it, I was curious from a toy standpoint. I know the two biggest distribution channels, from what I understand, in the U.S. was Toys R Us, / Walmart, and then Amazon, just being such a big force in and of itself. So I was just kind of curious, how much power do those guys have? So outside of just the content that you're distributing, but just really in terms of where they're able to actually get their hands on the toys. Has that been something that's changed, or is that?
Well, for anybody that's selling actual consumer goods, the retail space has changed dramatically. Toys R Us had a global presence, but the concentration and had a global presence. The concentration of retail is more marked in some markets than others. So you have alternatives. But clearly, the whole way of moving consumer good product, and maybe this is true also for all the CB product from the NBA, has shifted from brick and mortar to a combination of e-retail and brick and mortar and events. I mean, you when you work on live events, also, how do you monetize this with physical product? So it's been a lot of disruption on the trade front, not only for the toy industry. That was a big use case, and for a lot of people is checking how does the movement go from Walmart to an Amazon to a Toys R Us, and what's going to happen at the end with retail. I think still experiential elements of retail are going to be living for many time to come, but it's a big moment of shift. So.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what part of this is the experience that we're selling and what part of this is the product? And it feels like that balance has definitely shifted over the past couple of years. Is that something you can speak to again, just in terms of Vice and some of the conversation we've been having about live TV? I was wondering, just in terms of appealing to the youth market who are not used to doing live TV. What is even the verb there? I'm not
watching.
Even sure. Well, thank you, watching. Right, that other thing that you do, a little more passive. But just I'm curious if you were taking that into consideration with some of the younger parts of your audience.
Well, I mean, look, I think Snapchat and the success we've had on Snapchat over the last couple of years has been a very interesting index for the business generally, in that young audience, which I think I misstated earlier as being 12 to 24, it's the 12 to 18s, right? And the teenagers who interact with us do so exclusively through Snapchat. The stuff that works on Snapchat is not a sort of direct cut down of the digital content or TV content. It's a different format. It has a different set of inputs and different set of interactive benchmarks. What that has said to us basically is we're going to engender new audiences by some level of experimentation that's specific to the platform, but also is just for the sake of experimenting and kind of seeing what works. And what Joanna's referring to is our CEO, Nancy Dubuque, announced last week that we're going to go on air on Viceland, our our cable channel, in February with a live evening TV show, which will operate the way that TRL did in its heyday on MTV, or the morning news shows do on the big networks, where we turn our office into a studio and we have a series of recurring segments, and that forms a 2-hour block that people will be able to watch live as it happens, and then also where each of those blocks will get chopped into modular segments that will get released as social publishing and as digital content for the following day. Where we're brainstorming at the moment, and frankly we're going to do a lot of live prototyping on air, is figuring out which are the most transferable of those formats and which audiences they resonate with, right? There is going to be something, and this is definitively not what the development of people at the show want to do, but I think there is a decent possibility that we will end up with stuff that doesn't work on television, literally doesn't work for the TV format, but they do it anyway because it works so well as a social cut down later, right? And that's a fascinating moment in television where you're doing stuff specifically for another format in spite of the fact that it doesn't work on that format. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it just intuitively seems like it could, and I think we're the place to do that, and I think we want to wave a flag for that kind of experimentation.
That's just cool just to think about the kind of difference in values and what you're actually looking for.
Yeah, well, and look, hopefully we stumble on the next great storytelling paradigm. The platform, certainly Snap, IGTV, have done a really good job of forcing us to interact with content in a different way, and making us like it. Hopefully we find a similar format that can be as transformative.
If you have the model to monetize it, that is the other piece of innovation that you need to add to all of this. Because if you're going to have something that is not as productive from your monetization strategy, but you're going to rely on that next round, well, that's how the model needs to work. You need to understand how you're monetizing each piece of the model. And in the case of content, toys, and even for live events in sports, it's not only the event itself, but what happens around it then. that can be monetized. And a lot of people still don't have the model sorted out yet. I think those are the questions about what are these industries that are going to become and how related they're going to be in terms of content generation, physical product, physical virtual product. All of that comes together as a package. So.
And an audience that is so much more sophisticated because they really do seem to understand some of this value equation and willing to participate as long as the content itself is something that they're interested in. Just mindful of the time, so I just have one more question. Simon Clift, who was the global CMO of Unilever up until a couple of years ago, had mentioned that kids today actually will ring the doorbell with their thumb instead of their index finger just because their thumb is so much stronger, which is a little scary, honestly. But it just, you know.
Never heard that. No, I'm saying I believe it.
Are you challenging me?
No, I'm not challenging you. I've just learned something.
Like,
is what I'm telling you.
I'm curious. Actually, maybe your kids don't do this, so you know,
Yeah.
phrase them right.
Well,
right?
I mean, the thing that I think is funny, and I flubbed a point about this yesterday, is that my kids aren't going to ring doorbells. My kids are going to go, "Hey, I'm here," and the door is going to respond to them through the
There
voice
you go.
prompt.
So it doesn't even really matter. I mean, it just to me, like it was one of those moments, like it really chilled me to the bone in some ways, and it's such a stupid thing, and you know what I mean? But at the same time, it was like, wow, that totally changes the entire world. So anyway, on that level, I was just kind of curious if you've come across something that you would like to share, you know, something interesting or different or unique about the youth market that maybe people don't know, just from where you sit and what you've encountered, you know, something maybe just in the course of your day and your jobs where you said, holy, I did not expect that. I'm not allowed to say holy crap anymore because my 3-year-old does say it now.
I mean, well, I think I mentioned the survey that we did. I mean, one interesting thing that we learned there, so India was one of the markets where we did that survey. And what was fascinating was that youth in that market actually read the newspaper. And so for us, then we need to make sure that we still have some presence in the newspaper, which that I don't think that's true here in the United States or in other parts of the world, but
Until Ben gets his hands on it. It's the new hot medium.
But I mean, I
Can't
just thought that was extremely interesting.
I'm still very impressed with that fact that kids are so similar around the world before they get immersed on all of the cultural elements as they grow older, and the fact that content also travels well, especially in that target age, you know. Things, you know, Disney and all of these powerhouses have such a wide opportunity, and it's because the storylines and humanity has a lot of commonalities. And if you play out to that, I think that's something really powerful. And I grew up from one place to the other, so it should be a surprise for me. But still, going China, Japan, going to Africa, you can see that there's that commonality.
I've got something less beautiful. It's funny. So I was on Instagram yesterday, and I got served an ad for what is effectively a beanbag chair, and it was a cool looking thing. And I'm gonna move into a new house at some point soon, so my wife and I are talking about design choices kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a cool looking thing. So I stopped on it for a second, and then it started to serve me this text on screen that was sort of like 18% of adults report anxiety. 60% more people report being alone or whatever. This chair is the solution because it helps you de-stress. Now, that proposition aside, right? The idea that we're trying to sell me a beanbag chair.
About 3?
No, I'm gonna buy 2. I haven't bought any yet. I gotta checking with my wife. Got to figure that out. But what it brought me back to was a conversation that we've been having a lot lately about the increased levels of anxiety and the increased levels of loneliness and separation that young people, and when I say young people, in this case, I mean our sort of Gen Z audience is reporting. And I think that's something that we're going to have to look at very, very closely, right? The alone together relationship that you have with the device is going to create some real liabilities for them in terms of socialization and in terms of just their sort of mental health and well-being. And then while I was scrolling through Instagram, I got a text from my son that said, "Is your hotel at South Broadway and 3rd Street? Because that's where your AirPods are." So he was tracking me through my AirPods to make sure that he knew where I was. Now, I mean, my son's a pretty well-adjusted kid, but if he's got the technological means to do that, and he's got, this sort of tween, an anxiety that's brought on by his just general tween hormones, and then he's got a wider generational anxiety, like, that gets worrying. And I think that's something we all have to keep an eye on, because we are exporting behaviors from the Western world to the rest of the world that, could have huge effects to that end. Sorry, that was dark. I apologize, guys. It's just
Bean bags for everybody.
Also,
yeah.
also next year, maybe deception in the age of technology could be its own workshop.
Yeah, for sure.
How to. All right, anybody questions?
You guys touched a lot on TV and cable and social media, but I was wondering how your kind of advertising has gone through with streaming apps. Like, I have the Viceland app on my Roku.
Thank you.
But, yep, watch it all the time. But I was wondering if, like, you've spent time researching into that, or ways to kind of reaching audiences that way, because I know a lot of people around my age, I'm around 30, don't have cable TV anymore, and we mostly stream.
Did everybody hear the question?
So I presume the question was for me.
Everyone, but
Oh,
yeah.
thank you. Look, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. Our belief, generally speaking, is that the way to make advertising engaging and to therefore make it work is to make it as similar to the content that it surrounds as possible. And streaming apps in particular provide a really interesting opportunity for us to create essentially those advertising units and brand connection moments in between the content and make them feel relatively seamless. Hopefully, as you are watching the app, you are transitioning from programming into some kind of ad situation back into programming without really noticing too much of a friction between those two things. OTT is the best place for that to happen, because as opposed to digital video players, which, though you can present content that way, tend to stop and start, and terrestrial TV channels or cable channels where you get 2 minutes of local advertising from the MVPDs no matter what, streaming can theoretically exist without that. So that's a place that we want to experiment. And talking about the live show, I think we want to be making stuff on the live show that serves as live commercials and then ends up in those streaming ecosystems as value for advertisers, but also entertainment for consumers.
Yeah, hi. Speaking more about the youth content, first of all, Barbie's online blog is incredible. Really, really good content for kids of any age and adults. But I wanted to know specifically, do you guys localize your content when you're exporting it outside of the United States? Is it localized both in terms of how you produce it, or more translated, or does it speak more directly to the audience living there? And then as a secondary follow-up to Vice, do you, on the Snapchat side, is Snapchat localized, or do you expect more of a global audience to come and digest Americanized global culture?
So the question's about localization of content, and also heavy endorsement for Barbie's blog.
As I mentioned, there's a lot of translation in terms of product and content when you go younger. We use a lot of global content that gets reapplied to several markets, and it gets translated. So if we see that it's having traction, we go into a fast translation process to get it out there as quickly as possible. The thing with local content is that, of course, it needs to exist, and we're always partnering with local producers and developers to see what can be worked on the other side. So we have developed content in China. We have partnered with Korea. We've done content in Spain. The blog gets input from many countries because We have people on the ground from many places. So clearly this is a two-way communication, and when we see something that is getting traction and movement, we try to learn and reapply as quickly as we can.
In our business, we definitely do localize. So, I mean, if you look at, we have websites, we have 20 sites that are actually in local language. When you look at our games, we have about over 1,200 games throughout a season. There are certain games that we've started to time shift, meaning we changed the schedule of those games so that they are broadcast on prime time in certain markets. So in Europe and Africa, for example, we have a platform called NBA Saturdays and NBA Sundays. So those games are on prime time in those regions. And then we also do in-language commentary. So we have that in India, we have that in China, because it's really important. It just widens your reach when you do localize. And then of course we also work with influencers in those markets and then create content that way.
So, getting back to Vice's founding philosophy that you have to speak to your audience in the voice they speak to each other, and that translates down to language and in fact idiom as well. The thing we have said for years is that our Spanish content, or content in Spanish, has to be idiomatically different for Spain and for Mexico and for Argentina and for US Spanish-speaking audiences as well. So the idea of translating has always been really important to us, and it's something that we've done from the very beginning. As we translate across formats, you get into a dance between content that we believe is globally relevant and crosses national boundaries, and content that is more specifically local. And the thing that's interesting about as we're expanding into Asia in particular, is what we're finding is that the audience is there. And there's some theories about whether this is a global trend or whether it's Asia specific, have reached a point where they are not convinced that the global content is superior to the local content, and in fact are sort of not interested in it at all. Right? Our Asian CEO gave me an example the other day. He said the kids in Indonesia believe that Rich Brian is the best hip hop there is. Right? They don't care about Nas or Biggie or Lil Pump or whomever. That's their guy because he's their guy. We're seeing that more and more often, and I think that's going to push us into a place where, for instance, on Snap, when we launch in November in India, that's going to be almost entirely Indian content that probably will never translate back over to us, but will form a relationship with the audience there and a brand equity for us that feels Indian and feels local, and therefore feels in keeping with the DNA of Vice throughout.
Any other questions?
I'm just curious about the MBA curriculum and what that entails.
It's quite technical, but it's just, it captures the right way to teach the sport of basketball. It's not meant for elite training, so it's really meant to keep basketball fun and keep that play aspect. And so we share that curriculum with the ministries, and then they in turn share it with the schools. But the way we approach it, we're not just looking to make kids be good in basketball, right? We're trying to instill values as well, and that's all embedded into that curriculum.